Imagine a major corporate data breach.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking about the kind of nightmare scenario that makes international headlines. Millions of dollars are on the line, stock prices are plummeting in real time, and the entire executive board is in a state of just absolute sheer panic.
Oh, yeah.
But you, the digital forensics investigator, you are completely calm. You sit in the glow of your monitors, sifting through millions of lines of network logs. You track down the exact obscure IP address.
Right.
You isolate the custom malware payload hiding in the system architecture. You capture the perfect hash value, preserving the digital fingerprint of the crime. It is a technological slam dunk. You have found the smoking gun.
You've got them.
Exactly. But fast forward 8 months later, and the entire case completely falls apart in a crowded courtroom. The hacker walks free. The company absorbs catastrophic, unrecoverable losses,
Yeah.
and your reputation is in ruins.
It happens.
Why? Not because the science failed, not because you didn't know your stuff. The case collapsed because your written report was confusing, bloated, and unfocused, and opposing counsel completely tore you apart on the witness stand.
Yeah.
Welcome to this deep dive into the high-stakes, incredibly intense world where technology meets the courtroom.
It is a brutal, sobering reality check for a lot of tech professionals. And honestly, it happens far more often than people realize. You can be the most brilliant ethical hacker, the most detail-oriented systems analyst, or the most intuitive network engineer in the world. But if you cannot communicate your technical findings in a way that is legally airtight and easily digestible,
Your technical skills don't even matter.
they are effectively useless in a legal or corporate governance setting. That is exactly what we are focusing on today. This is the first of 15 deep dives where we will be comprehensively covering the Guide to Computer Forensics and Investigations.
Which is a massive undertaking.
It is. Today, we are specifically unpacking Chapter 2, which is Report Writing and Testimony for Digital Investigations. And I want to set the stage right up front. This deep dive is specifically designed for students in MIS, CIS, IT, and general business, particularly if you are affiliated with Tarleton State University's Dr. Sam Pack College of Business, or if you're taking a similar class anywhere else and preparing to enter the workforce. This is for you.
Absolutely.
Our entire mission today is to bridge that crucial, often overlooked gap between academic insight and real-world technology and business applications.
And before we unpack this, please like, subscribe, and share this episode so you don't miss any insider tips that could position you for a bright future in your chosen career. Also, be sure to check the description for access to additional resources you might find incredibly valuable. Because what we are talking about today is truly career-defining stuff.
It really is the foundation.
So let's dive right into the ultimate deliverable of any investigation, which is the forensic report. I mean, we spend so much time in IT and computer science programs learning how to extract data, how to analyze networks, how to find the hidden files.
The fun stuff.
Right, fun stuff. But the primary purpose of a forensic report is to present evidence that supports further investigation and, most importantly, is actually admissible in a court of law. The golden rule here, according to the source material, is limiting the report to specifics.
Think about the underlying psychology and the strategic necessity of that golden rule. Why do we limit to specifics? Because as hard drives get exponentially larger, I mean, we are talking terabytes and petabytes of data, and as corporate networks become vastly more complex, spanning across global cloud infrastructures, an unfocused report is a massive liability.
How so?
Well, it wastes an immense amount of time, and in the business and legal worlds, time is quite literally money. An unfocused report explodes costs. But beyond the financial aspect, it introduces the severe case-killing risk of overwhelming a non-technical audience. Think about a jury of everyday citizens. Think about a judge who went to law school, not engineering school. Or, in a corporate setting, think about a board of directors. If your audience has very little technical knowledge, giving them an extra 50 pages of raw data doesn't make you look smarter.
Right. It doesn't prove how hard you worked.
Exactly. All it does is confuse them. And a confused jury or a confused executive board is a highly dangerous thing for your case.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because I understand the theory there, but let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
If I am hired to investigate a system, isn't more data always better? It feels like if I ask someone for the time and they tell me it's 2 p.m., that's great. But if they also hand me a blueprint on how to build a Swiss watch, including the metallurgical breakdown of the gears, sure, I don't need it right now, but isn't it better to have it just in case? Why is it actually a liability to be overly thorough?
That is the exact trap that catches so many junior analysts. You are looking at it from an engineering mindset, where more data equals a more complete picture. You have to look at it from a legal and corporate risk mindset. Let's put you in a hypothetical corporate HR investigation.
Okay,
You are a junior IT administrator at a mid-sized logistics firm. The HR director comes to you and says, "We suspect employee A is spending hours every day browsing unauthorized, inappropriate websites on company time. We need you to pull their internet history for the last 30 days.
Okay, straightforward.
That is your specific mission. So you pull the logs, you find the unauthorized websites, clear violation of company policy. But while you are digging around an employee A system, you also notice that they are running a massive, highly complex fantasy football league using company servers, and they have downloaded some unlicensed software to manage it.
Oh boy.
You think to yourself, I'm being thorough, so you include the fantasy football league and the unlicensed software in your official report alongside the inappropriate browsing.
Right. I caught them doing 3 things wrong instead of 1. I'd expect a bonus for that.
You would expect a bonus, but what you actually just did was hand the employee's wrongful termination lawyer a massive gift.
Wait, really?
Yes. When this inevitably goes to arbitration or court, the opposing counsel will look at your report. They won't even talk about the inappropriate websites. They will spend 3 agonizing hours cross-examining you about the fantasy football league.
Just focusing on the extra stuff I found.
Exactly. They will ask you to explain the server load. They will ask if other employees run fantasy football leagues. They will ask if you investigated the CEO's computer for fantasy football. Suddenly, the entire trial isn't about the fireable offense. It's about whether the company selectively enforces its software policies.
Wow.
You introduced scope creep. Every single extraneous detail you include is a potential foothold for opposing counsel to create doubt, distract the jury, or confuse the core issue. You gave them the ammunition by not limiting your report strictly to the agreed-upon mission.
Okay, when you frame it like that, it makes perfect sense. I was hired to find the internet history, not audit their entire digital life. I am creating a distraction that the defense will weaponize. So how does an IT student preparing to enter the corporate world prevent themselves from falling into that trap?
It requires training yourself to think backwards. You have to define the investigation's goal or mission before you ever touch a keyboard. What is the decision that needs to be made based on this report?
Working with the end in mind.
Precisely. In a corporate environment, business executives want the bottom line. They need to make decisions based on risk, liability, and cost. If the goal is to determine if data left the network, you focus solely on exfiltration logs. You do not include a 20-page tangent about how their firewall rules are slightly inefficient, even if it's true. The source material emphasizes that when the audience lacks technical expertise, limiting the report to specifics isn't just a good idea, it is absolutely mandatory.
That perfectly sets up the reality of what we're actually writing, because it's not just one final report that gets handed over at the end of a neat, tidy investigation. The text breaks down the main types of reports into 3 distinct categories. You've got verbal preliminary reports, written preliminary reports, and formal written reports.
Right.
And alongside these, there is something called an examination plan, which is essentially a document that lets a witness or an attorney know what questions to expect and what areas will be covered. But the concept that really stuck out to me as a massive red flag in our sources is this idea of the high-risk document.
Yes, the high-risk document. To understand why a preliminary written report is considered so incredibly dangerous, we have to pause and explain a fundamental legal mechanism called discovery.
Okay, what is that?
Discovery is the pre-trial phase where attorneys seek information from the opposing side. It is the legal process of showing your cards. It includes demands for documents, depositions, and something called interrogatories.
Hold on, interrogatories. Let's give our business students a quick translation for that. What exactly is an interrogatory?
Think of an interrogatory as a take-home exam written by your worst enemy, entirely designed to make you fail, and you have to swear under penalty of perjury that all your answers are perfectly accurate.
That sounds awful.
They are written questions sent by the opposing attorney that you must answer in writing. During this discovery phase, the opposing side has a legal right to request almost everything related to the case. And here is the terrifying part for tech professionals. The moment you write something down, hit save or hit send, it becomes discoverable. It is no longer just your private working thoughts, it is a piece of evidence.
So if I just send a quick Slack message to the attorney who hired me, or drop an email to my CEO saying, hey, preliminary look at the server shows it was definitely an external hack, probably from a state-sponsored group, I'll have the full report next week. That casual email is discoverable.
Absolutely, and that is exactly why written preliminary reports are classified as high risk. A preliminary report, by its very nature, is an unfinished thought. It is messy. It contains your raw examiner notes, your gut feelings, tentative conclusions that you haven't fully scientifically verified yet, and areas that you've noted require further investigation.
And the other side gets to see all of that.
Opposing counsel will demand discovery on these preliminary communications, specifically to discredit you later when your final report comes out.
Let me guess. Because investigations evolve. If my preliminary email says external hack, but 2 weeks later, after deep forensic analysis, I realized it was actually an internal employee using a VPN to make it look external, and we put that in my final formal report. But the opposing attorney now has both documents.
Exactly. And during cross-examination in front of a jury, the opposing attorney will hold up your printed email. They will project it on a massive screen for everyone to see. And they will ask you, you've stated unequivocally in this email that it was an external hack. Were you incompetent then, or are you incompetent now? Why should this jury believe your final report when your preliminary report shows you were completely wrong? They will use the natural scientific evolution of a complex investigation to paint you as a flip-flopping, unreliable witness.
Which means there has to be a massive strategic difference between giving an attorney a verbal update over the phone versus sending them anything in writing.
There is. Many experienced forensic examiners and corporate IT directors will refuse to provide written preliminary reports unless absolutely forced to by client policy or a court order. A verbal report over a secure phone line might just be you saying, we found some anomalies, the investigation is ongoing, we are focusing our resources on the email server.
It's vague enough to be safe.
A verbal update is not a physical document that can be easily subpoenaed, taken out of context, and twisted.
But sometimes you have no choice, right? If you're an external consultant, the client is paying you, and they demand a written status update to justify the billable hours.
That happens a lot in business.
Right. So if you are forced to file a written preliminary report, the sources are very strict on what must be included to protect yourself. You have to include a billing summary, a confirmation of the examination scope, and strictly your tentative conclusions, clearly labeled as tentative.
The inclusion of the confirmation of the examination scope in that preliminary document is your life raft. It ties directly back to limiting to specifics. By putting the scope in writing early on, you are building a legal fence around your work. You are stating, for the permanent record, I was hired to look at Server A and Server B between January 1st and January 15th.
I see.
This protects you months later when opposing counsel tries to attack you for not investigating Server C. You simply point back to that scope and say, Server C was outside the parameters of my authorized investigation. You stop their attack in its tracks. Moving from those high-risk preliminary findings to crafting the final bulletproof formal report is a journey of intense refinement. It is about taking the raw, chaotic data and molding it into an impenetrable shield of facts.
Let's talk about building that shield. Once you are ready to write the formal report, the structure is paramount. The anatomy of a bulletproof digital forensics report is highly standardized. You have your abstract, which is your high-level executive summary. You have your table of contents, the main body of the report where the narrative lives, and the conclusion. That's your primary structure.
Don't forget the supporting materials.
Right. Following that, you have your supporting materials, appendices for the massive data dumps, a glossary to define your terms, references, and acknowledgments. But because this is digital forensics, there are very specific, highly technical elements that must be included in the body. We're talking about detailing the evidence, describing its physical or digital appearance, the exact data collection methods used, the mathematical calculations, and a section called the limitations of knowledge. Now, I want to stop right there and push back on this.
Go ahead.
If I am a highly paid consultant, charging a company $500 an hour to find out how they got hacked, or if I am a senior IT manager trying to prove my worth to the board, why on earth would I include a section highlighting what I don't know?
It sounds counterintuitive.
It really does. Doesn't admitting my limitations make me look weak, unqualified, or like I didn't do a thorough job? If I tell a CEO, I couldn't find the data past 90 days, aren't they going to wonder what they're paying me for?
It does feel counterintuitive, but admitting your limitations actually achieves the exact opposite result. It profoundly strengthens your credibility, both in a courtroom and in a corporate boardroom. It establishes you as an objective scientist rather than a hired gun or a yes man. Let's look at how this plays out in reality. Imagine you are presenting your forensic report to that CEO. You state your findings clearly, but you also include a limitations section saying, due to the company's automated data retention policy, firewall logs older than 90 days were systematically purged prior to my retention. Therefore, I cannot conclude with scientific certainty what network activity occurred prior to that date.
Okay, so I'm blaming their own system architecture for the blind spot.
You aren't blaming, you are stating a structural fact. By stating that limitation, you are demonstrating absolute scientific objectivity. You are proving that you are bound by the empirical evidence and only the empirical evidence. You are refusing to guess.
That makes sense.
Now, fast forward to the trial. The opposing defense attorney, trying to create reasonable doubt, aggressively asks you, isn't it true that my client's login credentials could have been compromised by a different hacker 6 months ago and you just missed it?
They're trying to trap you.
Exactly. If you didn't state your limitations, you might panic, stumble, or try to guess. But because you wrote it down, you don't even blink. You confidently reply, as stated in the limitations section of my report on page 14, I cannot speak to any timeline prior to 90 days due to the absence of company logs. You disarm their trap before they can even spring it. You become an unshakable witness.
So what does this all mean? It means you aren't hiding your blind spots. You are weaponizing them. You are defining the borders of your knowledge so clearly that nobody can push you outside of them. That is brilliant.
It's all about control of the narrative.
And speaking of being unshakable, let's talk about the data collection methods section of the report. The text specifically highlights using a hash algorithm to prove data authenticity. For the general business students listening, let's break this down. A hash algorithm is basically a specifically designed mathematical formula that provides a unique value, a digital fingerprint for a piece of data, whether that's a single text file or an entire 2-terabyte hard drive.
Let's give them a more concrete analogy. Hash values are often expressed in hexadecimal. Hexadecimal is just a base 16 counting system. Humans naturally count in base 10, 0 through 9. Hexadecimal uses 0 through 9, and then the letters A through F to represent 10 through 15.
Okay.
A through F.
It's essentially the more compact alphabet that computers use to express large binary numbers. When you run a hash algorithm like MD5 or SHA-25C6 on a file, it spits out a long string of these hexadecimal characters. For example, a string that looks like 5D414802 ABC4B2A76B 971D 911017C592. Right, and the magic of that long string of characters is its absolute fragility. If I take a massive 50-page Word document and run a hash on it, I get that unique string. If I open that document, add a single extra space after a period on page 49, and save it, the entire hash value completely changes.
Completely different string.
It won't even look remotely similar. It proves mathematically that the file has been altered. So in your report, you don't just write, I copied the files from the HR director's laptop. That's sloppy.
It's worse than sloppy. It's inadmissible. You must document the exact hash algorithm used, the hash value of the original evidence, and the hash value of your forensic copy. This proves to the court and to any opposing expert witness who wants to check your work that the evidence hasn't been tampered with, altered, or corrupted during your investigation.
It's mathematical proof.
And that level of absolute mathematical precision must carry over into the writing style of the narrative itself.
The sources have very strict guidelines on this writing style. You are supposed to use a first-person perspective in natural language style. So you write, I extracted the data, instead of the passive academic style like the data was extracted by the investigator.
Because passive voice creates ambiguity. Ambiguity creates reasonable doubt. Who extracted the data? When was it extracted? If you say the data was extracted, a defense attorney can argue that maybe an unqualified intern did it, or maybe it happened automatically and incorrectly. When you say, I extracted the data, you are taking ownership of the scientific process. Furthermore, you must use technical terminology consistently. This is a massive pitfall for IT professionals who use slang interchangeably. If you call a physical device a flash drive on page 1, do not call it a thumb drive on page 10, a USB mass storage device on page 20, and a memory stick in your conclusion.
I mean, to anyone in IT, those are all the exact same thing. It feels repetitive to use the exact same term 50 times.
It might feel repetitive to you, but remember your audience. To a lay jury or to a highly aggressive defense attorney actively looking for a loophole, you are suddenly talking about 4 entirely different pieces of physical evidence. They'll say, wait, the witness said they found the stolen files on a flash drive, but later they say they examined a thumb drive. Which one is it? Are there missing devices? Consistency is your armor against confusion.
So how do you manage all of this when you were staring at a blank Microsoft Word document, getting ready to write? Our sources suggest a tool called an audience worksheet. I really like this concept for business students.
It's a great tool.
Imagine you are an MIS student right now, working on your final capstone project. Your audience is your professor. The tone is going to be academic, focused on proving you understand the underlying theories. Now take that exact same project data and imagine you are presenting it to the chief operating officer of a hospital whose patient database just got encrypted by ransomware.
Completely different tone.
That tone needs to be incredibly urgent, executive level, and focused purely on operational recovery and risk. Now imagine presenting that same data to a jury of 12 people who might not know the difference between a Wi-Fi router and a cable modem. The audience dictates the tone, the vocabulary, and the structure. You cannot write one single report and hand it to all three groups expecting the same result.
Precisely, which underscores the absolute necessity of the drafting process. The source material emphasizes that you must draft a first version, meticulously review your raw examiner notes, and deeply analyze the data before you ever attempt the final polished version.
It's not a one-draft process.
Writing a digital forensics report is not a college essay you can start the night before it is due. It is an arduous process of translation. You are translating complex, binary, hexadecimal reality into a coherent, persuasive narrative that a non-technical person can confidently use to make a massive legal or business decision. That requires drafting, aggressive self-editing, peer review, and ruthless refinement.
Let's pivot to what happens after that ruthless refinement. You've written the perfect report. It's tight, it's specific, the hash values match perfectly, the limitations are clearly stated, and you've consistently called it a USB mass storage device 64 times.
You feel great.
You might think your job is done, time to send the invoice. But according to the text, we are just getting started. Now we enter the phase where you build your investigator's arsenal, preparing to testify. Because you aren't just handing this report over and going home, you have to physically stand behind it, in a courtroom, under oath, while someone tries to destroy your reputation.
And they will try.
To survive that, you need to build report resources. The sources mention creating glossaries, reference banks, and maintaining a meticulously updated curriculum vitae, or CV. And this brings up a great legal term from the text, Bonafides.
Bonafides is a critical concept for any professional entering a consulting or expert field. It literally translates to good faith, but in the context of the legal system, it refers to a formal, documented statement listing your qualifications, your credentials, and your legitimacy as an expert. This comes in the form of your CV.
Right.
Now, your CV as an expert witness is an extensive, exhaustive outline of your professional history. It should include your higher education, your specialized training, your certifications, your chronological work experience, but also every single case you've ever testified in, any training you have conducted for law enforcement or corporate clients, academic publications you have contributed to, and professional associations or industry awards you've received. It is the absolute bedrock of your credibility before you even open your mouth in the courtroom.
I have a major point of friction with the source material here, though. The text gives a very specific, stark warning about the CV. It says your CV must reflect a broad professional background, and it should never be tailored specifically to a given trial. As someone who has been taught in every business communications class to tweak, tailor, and optimize my resume for every single job application, that sounds like terrible advice.
I know. It goes against everything you learn in business school.
Why wouldn't I highlight my extensive network intrusion experience if the trial I'm testifying in is specifically about network intrusion? Why include my work on mobile phone forensics if it's irrelevant to the case?
Because you are fundamentally misunderstanding the environment. A trial is not a job interview. It is an adversarial arena. In a job interview, the HR manager wants you to be the perfect fit. In a courtroom, the opposing attorney wants you to be a fraud. If an opposing attorney discovers, through the aggressive discovery process we talked about earlier, that the CV you submitted for this current network intrusion trial heavily emphasizes network security, but a CV you submitted 6 months ago for a different trial emphasized mobile phone forensics, and you completely scrubbed the mobile phone experience from this new version to look more specialized,
They will
destroy you on the stand.
What's the attack vector there?
They will hold up both versions of your CV side by side to the jury, and they will say, ladies and gentlemen, look at these two documents. This witness dynamically changes their entire professional background to fit whoever is writing their paycheck. They are not an objective, reliable scientist. They are a corporate hired gun. They custom fit their credentials to match whatever narrative the prosecution wants to tell today. The jury will instantly lose trust in you. Your CV must be a static, comprehensive, universally truthful document of your entire professional life. It cannot shift based on the wind of the current case.
Wow, okay, that is a massive paradigm shift. You are protecting your overall integrity against the accusation of bias. It's not just about proving what you know, it's about proving you are a reliable, unshakable source of objective truth. And speaking of being reliable, the text also hammers home the importance of preparing technical definitions in advance. It says you must establish uniform technical definitions.
Yes. If you are going to use the term malware or phishing or SQL injection in your testimony, you cannot make up a definition on the fly. You need to have a clear, non-ambiguous, industry standard definition memorized and ready to deliver. This is where the sheer physical pressure of the courtroom comes into play.
It's nerve-wracking.
Very. When you are sitting comfortably at your desk, sipping coffee, you can easily explain what a hash algorithm is to a coworker. But when you are sitting in the witness box, your palms are sweating, the opposing attorney is glaring at you, the judge is looking down at you waiting for an answer, and you are asked to define a complex term under oath. If you stumble, if you start using heavy jargon to cover your nerves, or worse, if you give a definition that slightly contradicts something you wrote in the glossary of your report, your credibility takes a massive hit. You must rehearse these definitions so they are uniform and repeatable. This ties directly into the scientific principle that your evidence must be repeatable in case of challenges.
Which is the core of science.
Exactly. If another expert witness, one hired by the defense, uses the exact same hash algorithm on the same file, they must get the exact same result. Digital forensics is a science, and science must be reproducible.
And while you are preparing all of this, your static CV, your memorized definitions, your particularly repeatable evidence, you might also have to deal with an entirely different kind of pressure, which is the news media. High-profile fiber cases, like a major hospital network getting held for ransom or a massive bank losing customer data, attract serious media attention. The text mentions you need to prepare to address the news media during the trial process, but it strongly cautions about what should and should not be disclosed. I can imagine a junior IT guy stepping out of a courthouse, and suddenly there are 3 cameras in his face.
It is a massive liability area. The absolute golden rule here is you never, ever try your case in the media. Any statement you make to a reporter, any casual comment you make to a camera crew can and will be meticulously scrutinized by the opposing counsel.
They're watching everything.
If you say something to a journalist that even slightly contradicts your written report or your planned testimony, you have just handed the defense a gift on a silver platter. They will subpoena the news footage and play it in court. Generally, the retaining attorney or a designated corporate public relations officer should handle all media interactions. If you are cornered in a parking lot, your only response should be acknowledging that it is an ongoing legal matter and you cannot comment. Jeopardizing a multi-million-dollar trial because you wanted to look smart on the evening news for 15 seconds is a career-ending move.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Keep your mouth shut and let the lawyers do the talking outside the courtroom. Because inside the courtroom, you're going to have to do plenty of talking. Which brings us to the critical distinction between the 2 roles you might play: a fact witness versus an expert witness.
This is a huge distinction.
The sources define these 2 distinct roles very clearly, and blending them up is a fatal error. A fact witness, which is sometimes called a lay witness, is someone whose testimony is based strictly on personal observation. They testify only to the facts, the literal findings of the investigation. Absolutely no opinions, no assumptions, and no inferences are allowed in court from a fact witness. On the other hand, an expert witness is someone whose testimony explicitly includes opinions based on their professional experience, the facts gathered during the investigation, and deductive reasoning.
Understanding this distinction is paramount for anyone entering the tech workforce. You have to know which hat you are wearing. Usually, the retaining attorney or your corporate legal team informs you of your role during your preparation. You never walk into a courtroom guessing. But the stakes of staying in your designated lane cannot be overstated.
I can see the line getting blurry, though. Let's role-play this for a second. Let's say I'm an entry-level network admin. I'm called as a fact witness. I'm on the stand for 4 hours just reading lines from a firewall log. Isn't it human nature to eventually try to explain why the data looks the way it does? What happens if I slip up? Like, say I'm on the stand and I say, I found these deleted files in the hidden recycling bin, which clearly shows the defendant was trying to hide the evidence of the data theft.
The moment you say the phrase, which clearly shows the defendant was trying to hide the evidence, you have stepped on a legal landmine. You have crossed the rigid line from fact to opinion. You are inferring intent. As a fact witness, you are not legally qualified or permitted in that moment to infer the psychological intent of the user.
So what happens?
The defense attorney will immediately shoot up and shout, "Objection." Witness is offering an expert opinion without being qualified. The judge will likely sustain the objection and strike your testimony from the record. But the damage is done. The defense will now use that slip-up to tear your objectivity apart. They will argue to the jury that you are biased, that you aren't just an objective IT guy reporting the facts, but that you have a personal vendetta and are actively trying to convict their client. You have compromised your entire testimony. As a fact witness, your only job is to say, "I found these specific deleted files in the recycling bin on this date at this time, full stop, silence."
That is a huge practical takeaway. You have to understand your lane. If you are hired to pull server logs, you report the logs. Here are the IP addresses that access the server at 3 a.m. You do not say, "It looks like the Russian syndicate was downloading company secrets." That is an analysis of intent and origin. If you are hired specifically to determine who the logs point to and why it happened, then you are operating in an analytical capacity, and you must be formally qualified by the court as an expert witness to say that. Know the difference, because overstepping your bounds can ruin an entire investigation.
And becoming formally qualified as an expert witness involves a very specific, intimidating legal crucible. This transitions us perfectly into understanding the trial process itself and what it actually looks like to survive examination on the witness stand.
Let's do a massive deep dive into surviving the trial process. For a lot of tech professionals who are used to server rooms and cubicles, the courtroom is completely alien territory. It has its own language, its own rules, and its own intense rhythm. The text outlines the chronological stages of a trial so we know what to expect. It starts with motions in lemon, then impaneling the jury, opening statements by the attorneys, the plaintiff's case, the defense's case, the rebuttal, closing arguments, and finally, jury instructions. Let's break some of these down, because throwing around terms like motions in lemon without context doesn't help anyone.
Motions in lemon are pre-trial motions. Think of them as the bouncer at the door of an exclusive club, but the club is the courtroom, and the guests trying to get in are pieces of evidence. Before the jury is ever brought into the room, the attorneys argue before the judge about what evidence should be allowed in and what should be kept out. For a digital forensics expert, this is where opposing counsel might argue that your method of collecting data was flawed, and therefore your entire hard drive image shouldn't be allowed into the trial.
So the fight starts before the trial even officially begins.
Exactly. Assuming your evidence survives the bouncer, the trial proceeds. The usual intervention of a digital forensics expert happens during the plaintiff's case or the defense's case, depending on who hired you, and potentially again during the rebuttal stage to contradict the other side's expert. But before you are allowed to give a single opinion about the data to the jury, you have to survive a brutal qualification process called Voir Dire.
Voir dire. That sounds like a public job interview where half the room actively wants you to fail.
That is a perfect analogy. Voir dire is the qualification phase. You take the stand, and the attorney who hired you asks you a series of questions designed to establish your credentials before the judge and jury. They will ask about your degrees, your certifications like your CISSP or your NC, your years of experience, and they will submit your static CV into the record. The goal is for the judge to officially recognize you as an expert in your specific field.
But the opposing attorney gets to participate in voir dire too, right? They can cross-examine your credentials before you even get to talk about the evidence.
Absolutely, and they will try to draw blood immediately. They will try to prove to the judge that you actually aren't an expert. They might point out that while you have a degree in computer science, you've never specifically worked on a Linux server breach before, which is what this case is about. Or they might point out your certifications expired 2 months ago. If they succeed in casting enough doubt, the judge will rule that you are not qualified to give expert opinions and you are dismissed. Your entire contribution to the case is over before it started. Assuming you pass voir dire, you then move into your actual testimony, which is divided into two vastly different experiences: direct examination and cross-examination.
Let's talk about direct examination first. This is where you are answering the questions from the friendly attorney, the one who hired you. The text emphasizes the importance of reviewing and rehearsing all questions prior to this. You aren't scripting your answers like a robot reading a teleprompter, but you know exactly what topics are coming. You've paced the hallways with this attorney. You are drawing your answers from independent recollection, your customary practice, and the documentation of your report. It should feel like a very formal, highly articulate, well-prepared professional conversation.
Direct examination is your opportunity to clearly, methodically, and calmly explain your highly technical findings to the lay jury. You are the teacher, and they are the students. It should be smooth. But then, the friendly attorney sits down, and the opposing attorney stands up. Comes cross-examination.
And cross-examination is the brawl. This is the gauntlet. This is where the opposing attorney takes over, and their primary singular goal is to discredit everything you just spent 2 hours explaining. They will try to find microscopic inconsistencies between your written report and your verbal testimony. They will attack your motives, suggesting you are biased because you are being paid. They will attack your technical knowledge, trying to trick you with obscure, highly complex technical questions to make you look incompetent in front of the jury. Let's role-play this so our listeners can feel the shift in tone. I'll be the aggressive defense attorney. You be the forensic expert.
I'm ready.
Mr. Expert, you testified during direct examination that you were absolutely certain the malware was installed on my client's server at exactly 2:14 a.m. on October 12th. Is that correct?
Yes, based on the firewall logs and the timestamp on the executable file.
Based on the logs. Fascinating. And isn't it true, Mr. Expert, that server timestamps can easily be altered by anyone with administrative privileges?
It is possible for a user with root access to manipulate system time, yes.
It is possible. So, you admit it's possible. Did you personally verify the cryptographic integrity of the NTP, the network time protocol server, syncing with my client's machine at 2:11 a.m. on October 12th?
I did not specifically analyze the external NTP server traffic as it was outside the defined scope of my investigation, which focused on the internal network logs.
Outside your scope, you didn't check it. So, you are asking this jury to send my client to prison based on a timestamp that you admit could be faked and that you didn't even bother to fully verify. No further questions, Your Honor.
And scene. That is exactly how it happens. Notice what the attorney did there. They took a theoretical possibility timestamp manipulation and used my admission and my limited scope to make it sound like I was sloppy and incompetent.
So how do you survive that without losing your mind? What are the behavioral tips for sitting on that stand when someone is professionally trying to destroy your reputation and twist your words? The sources are really clear on what not to do. You must avoid being argumentative. If the opposing attorney is being aggressive and condescending, you cannot snap back at them. You cannot become defensive. You shouldn't be overly talkative. Only answer the exact question asked. Do not volunteer extra information like you almost did with the NTP server. Do not be too technical, because that just alienates the jury and makes you look arrogant, and never appear surprised or unprepared.
What's fascinating here is the immense psychological discipline required to sit in that chair. If an opposing attorney asks a question that seems totally absurd or technically illiterate, your natural human instinct might be to roll your eyes, sigh, or give a sarcastic answer. You cannot do that. The jury is watching your every microscopic reaction. They are judging your character as much as your science. If you get angry, you look unstable and biased. If you get defensive, you look like you have something to hide. You must remain the calm, objective, unshakable scientist. You take a breath, you think about your answer, you look directly at the jury, and you deliver the truth clearly and concisely.
There is also this incredibly sneaky, almost dirty legal tactic mentioned in the text that I'd never heard of before. It's called conflicting out. This is where opposing attorneys try to prevent a top-tier digital forensics examiner from testifying at all before the trial even starts.
Explain how it works, because it's a critical warning for independent consultants.
Early on in a case, a law firm might call up a well-known, highly respected local forensics expert and say, "Hey, we are looking to hire a consultant for a massive corporate espionage case. We'd love to hire you. Can we discuss some of the high-level details in our defense strategy with you to see if it's a good fit?" The expert, thinking they're landing a big client, talks to them for 20 minutes, hears some of the details, and shares some initial thoughts. Then the law firm says, "Thanks, we'll review your rates and get back to you." But they never hire them. They ghost the expert. Months later, the other side, the prosecution, is looking for an expert, and they try to hire that exact same person. The moment the prosecution lists that expert as a witness, the first law firm will jump up and say to the judge, "Conflict of interest." That expert consulted with us. They know our confidential defense strategy. They cannot be allowed to testify for the prosecution.
It is a ruthless, highly effective tactic. By having a brief, seemingly innocent 20-minute conversation, they effectively neutralize a top-tier expert from being used against them. For professionals entering this field, it means you have to have incredibly strict intake procedures. You do not discuss the specifics of a case, and you certainly don't listen to a lawyer's strategy until a formal retainer agreement has been signed and a thorough conflict check has been completed. It is a stark reminder that the courtroom battlefield extends far beyond the witness stand. The legal maneuvering starts from the very moment the breach occurs.
Which perfectly leads us to step back into the pretrial timeline for the final major topic of our deep dive depositions and hearings. This is what I like to call the pretrial minefield. Before you ever see a jury, before opening statements are ever made, you are likely going to have to sit through a deposition. The text defines a deposition as a formal examination in which a witness is questioned under oath with only the opposing parties, the witness's attorney, and a court reporter present. There is no judge sitting on a bench. There is no jury in the box. Its entire legal purpose is to give the opposing counsel a chance to preview your testimony, lock you into your answers, and search for weaknesses before the actual trial.
There are two main types of depositions mentioned in our source material. First, there is the testimony preservation deposition. This is exactly what it sounds like. It is held to formally preserve testimony in case of an unavoidable schedule conflict or a health problem or a witness relocating, which might prevent them from being physically present at the trial. These are usually videotaped, formally recorded by a stenographer, and they proceed very much like a normal courtroom examination with polite decorum. But the other type is the discovery deposition, and this is a completely different, much darker animal.
The text describes a discovery deposition as an unnatural process, and it calls it highly aggressive. Why is it so much worse than being in court?
Because the opposing attorney is conducting the equivalent of both direct and cross-examination at the exact same time, and they're doing it without a judge present in the room to act as a referee. In a courtroom, if an attorney starts yelling at you, badgering you, or asking incredibly misleading, multi-part trick questions, your attorney will object, and the judge will immediately tell them to stop and rephrase. In a discovery deposition, while your attorney can say, "Objection for the official written record," the judge isn't there to rule on it, so the questioning usually just continues. The opposing attorney will actively push you to make mistakes. They will try to make you angry. They will ask the exact same highly technical question 5 different ways over 3 hours to see if you slip up and give slightly different answers. They want to find the limits of your knowledge, the limits of your patience, and the limits of your professionalism.
They're essentially doing a psychological and technical stress test on you as a witness. And the terrifying part of this stress test is something called the deposition bank. The text defines a deposition bank as a massive searchable library of previously given testimony that law firms subscribe to and access. Let's make this real. Let's talk about a hypothetical investigator named Dave.
Let's hear about Dave.
Dave is a great forensic investigator. In 2018, Dave works a case in Dallas, Texas. He sits in a discovery deposition, and under pressure, he gets a little sloppy with his terminology. He casually refers to a piece of evidence as a flash drive, even though his report called it a USB mass storage device. The lawyer in Dallas doesn't make a big deal out of it. The case settles. Fast forward to 2024. Dave is now working on a massive, high-stakes corporate espionage case in Manhattan. He sits down for a discovery deposition with a ruthless New York law firm. That New York lawyer logs into the National Deposition Bank, searches Dave's name, and pulls the transcript from that random 2018 Dallas case. Suddenly, the New York lawyer slides a piece of paper across the table and says, "Dave, in 2018, you defined this device as a flash drive. Today, you are calling it a USB mass storage device. Which is it, Dave? Have the standards of your science changed, or are you just making this up as you go?"
Poor Dave. But that is exactly how it happens, and it brings us right back to the absolute importance of standardizing your technical definitions and maintaining a static, unchanging CV. You are leaving a permanent, highly searchable, legally binding record of everything you say under oath throughout your entire career. In a discovery deposition, you must be incredibly guarded. You listen to the question, you pause. You formulate your answer exactly as it relates to the specific facts in your formal report, and you say nothing more. You do not offer helpful analogies. You do not try to educate the opposing attorney on network architecture. You just survive the stress test.
And finally, rounding out the pretrial phase, the text mentions hearings, guidelines for testifying at hearings. A hearing is similar to a trial testimony, but is usually just in front of a judge to determine specific legal issues like whether certain evidence is admissible under those motions in line we discussed earlier. Even without a jury present, the hearing process acts as a critical preliminary stage. The golden rule here is that polite, formal, professional behavior is paramount. The judge is assessing your credibility, your demeanor, and your expertise just as much as a jury would. If you are arrogant to a judge during a hearing, they will remember it during the trial.
If we look at the testimony planning and review process overall, it requires you to synthesize all of these disparate elements. You need your updated static CV ready. You need all your digital evidence prepared, hacked, and documented so perfectly that it is reproducible by a hostile third party. You need your written report flawlessly edited with its limitations clearly stated. You need any graphical materials or charts simplified for a lay audience. And above all, you need your mental state steeled for the psychological warfare of cross-examination and discovery depositions. It is an exhausting, meticulous, highly stressful process, but it is the only way to ensure that the objective science you worked so hard to uncover actually serves justice in the end.
And that brings us to the end of our massive deep dive into Chapter 2. Let's do a quick recap of the journey we've been on. The core theme today, especially for those business and tech students listening, is that digital forensics isn't just about hacking the hackers. It's not just about sitting in a dark room finding the hidden data. It is about securely preserving that data, communicating it flawlessly in a structured report, and fiercely defending it under intense, hostile legal pressure. We talked about why limiting your report strictly to specifics is the golden rule to prevent confusing a jury or annoying a CEO. We explored the extreme dangers of preliminary written reports and how the pre-trial discovery process can weaponize your own emails against you. We walked through structuring a bulletproof formal report, the strategic counterintuitive value of omitting your limitations, and the absolute necessity of the drafting process.
We also unpacked the investigator's arsenal preparing uniform technical definitions so you don't end up like Dave, and maintaining an unshifting CV so you aren't labeled a corporate hired gun. We clarified the stark, dangerous legal boundaries between a fact witness just reporting findings and an expert witness offering analytical opinions. And we walked through the gauntlet of the trial process itself, from the bouncer at the door of Voir Dire to the intense psychological stress test of cross-examination and discovery depositions.
If we tie this all back to our opening Netflix-style documentary hook, that massive corporate data breach case that fell apart. It didn't fall apart because the technology failed or the firewall logs were wrong. It fell apart because the investigator didn't prepare for the reality of cross-examination. They didn't limit their report to specifics, leaving a massive opening for the defense to create a circus. They let the opposing counsel rattle them during a grueling discovery deposition, creating a transcript full of tiny, fatal inconsistencies. They lost the war because they didn't know how to fight on the courtroom battlefield.
For the students and young professionals listening, especially those preparing to apply these lessons in real corporate business environments, let this serve as your wake-up call. Your technical brilliance, your coding skills, your network architecture knowledge, that is only half the job. The other half is translation, communication, and defense.
Join us next time as we move on to Chapter 3, the Investigator's Laboratory and Digital Forensics Tools, where we finally get to step out of the courtroom and look at the actual hardware, software setups, and physical labs used to catch the bad guys. It's going to be an incredibly fascinating technical deep dive. Please review our channel for other podcasts, playlists, videos, and classes to help you educate, learn, and continuously grow in your career. Embracing lifelong learning is the only way you stay ahead in this rapidly evolving industry.
I will leave you with this final reflective question to mull over as you go about your week. If you had to take the witness stand tomorrow morning to defend a technical project you just completed, whether that's a capstone project for a class or a major infrastructure upgrade for your job, how confident are you that your documentation would hold up under 3 hours of aggressive, hostile cross-examination?
That's a wrap on this episode of Digital Forensics. Until next time, analyze the copy, preserve the original.